This is HM AR Mobile Tech. Today I'm doing high pressure and return hoses on a standard conventional gearbox power steering system on a 1995 Chevy Silverado 5.7 liter V8. And this is just a shot here of the before and how it all looks, and these hoses are leaking. They're probably the original ones from 95. And then over here is what you'll be needing. You'll just be needing standard power steering fluid, and then you'll need your hoses, and make sure you get the O-rings, and then you'll need a approximately 1-inch hose clamp for the other end that you'll see right there that's going to be going on to the power steering return side. And then I'm going to use a Mighty Vac fluid extractor, and then I just have an old coffee container, creamer container that I have that's the fluid's going to go into. And then over here I've got my torque wrench, and I got a series of 18 millimeter closed end, open end line wrenches and crow's feet. And then I have an assortment of 3/8 drive ratchets, torque wrench, 3/8 drive, and then the 16 millimeter or 5/8 crow's foot line wrench that that's going to connect up to your 3/8 drive extension, and then a stubby that I made myself. I couldn't seem to find an 18 millimeter stubby that was not in a set, so I just cut it and made my own. And then I just filed on the end to make it so that there weren't any sharp edges. And then I just have a regular 18 millimeter open end combo wrench, and then vice grips. The reason for the vice grips is that if those lines are difficult to get off, and they start rounding when you're using the proper tools, then you can go ahead and you can just get them off any way that you can by using a pair of vice grips, by grabbing them on there. If the threads start getting to be the hex edges start to round off when you're using your wrenches or whatever, then you can use this. You can grab on them and get them off. So I'm also going to be flushing the power steering fluid system, and then you'll need to jack up the front end and then use appropriate jacks. I got these tall yellow ones here that'll work really well for this lifted truck, and then a 3-ton jack, and if you have 2 of them, it's even better. And then that way you can lift up the front both at the same time, and then you can put your yellow jack stands in the front somewhere underneath the axle or the frame somewhere, and then that'll help you for when you're turning the steering wheel left and right, approximately 10 times to the left, 10 times to the right, and then shut the engine off, and then you'll suck out the fluid, and I'll show a little bit of that in the later on in the video. Once you have the truck fully jacked up and supported with jack stands, and just lift it off enough for you to put your foot underneath the wheel like that. And you don't have to do it this way, but it just makes it easier to turn the steering wheel, and it just puts a little bit of less wear and tear on the tires that are, when they're touching the ground, they're spinning, and they're you're not going anywhere, so you're just putting additional wear on the tire by the weight of the vehicle being pressed down on the tire and you turning it on the floor. So that's why I do it this way, and it is recommended that you do this. So then you just remove the cap to the power steering fluid and get that out of the way, and then just use your fluid extractor and then put that in there and suck out all the fluid. And this is for the very beginning step for when you're going to do the power steering system flush. So then once you get that whole reservoir empty, then fill it back up, and then the test can begin. The procedure can begin for, you'll start the engine up, and I don't have anyone to film me do this, so you'll start the engine up and you'll turn the steering wheel from lock to lock, all the way to the left 10 times, all the way to the right 10 times, and then maybe just let it idle for a few minutes. Maybe do it again to the left, to the right, 2 times. Shut the engine off, and then suck the fluid out again. And I like to do this step about 3 times. That's a good flush. And then suck the fluid out again, and just keep basically repeating this process 3 times. And once you've done that, then the system is flushed, and then you can prepare yourself to get started and remove these hoses. So before you remove the hoses, what you can do is suck out the fluid 1 more time, and then put it in your container, and then you can go ahead and remove the hoses. That way you won't have a huge mess. I found it was easy to spray a little bit of PB Blaster penetrating lubricant onto the threads here that go to these pressure fittings down there, and then I use my extended handle 3/8 drive ratchet with my crow's foot and put it on the nut down there, and I was able to get it loose. And I did it for all the rest of them as well. So I found it was easiest to use a 16 millimeter or 5/8 inch wrench open end to get into the back side of the pump, and to remove the I think this is a return, or the high pressure line, and to get that off, thankfully I didn't have to use vice grips. So, and you would only do that if you knew that you're going to be replacing the hoses. And then what you want to make sure is you get the orientation right, and the high pressure hose here goes to the one closest to the radiator fan shroud, so the furthest forward that way, and then the return line is the one that goes a little bit closer forward. So there's a return line, and this is the high pressure line. And then remember, when you take these out, make sure that you if you don't see the old O-ring, that you retrieve it out of there, because if you put 2 O-rings in there, it's going to leak, because you're going to have a new one on the new hose. So just make sure those come with the old hoses, the old O-rings. So when removing the low pressure side hose, I found it real easy to get it off, because you're probably going to be, if you're replacing this hose, it's going to be the original one, and it's going to be on there really, really tight because of the hose clamp, and because the hose just hasn't moved in, depending on the year, your vehicle, maybe 20, 25 years. So these hose clamp pliers work great for getting the hose off. And, you just grab it on here and just twist it, and then maybe come up above, up on the pipe, or that part there, and then just pull it back. So that does help when you're pulling hoses off, is to go back up to where like the nipple is, or the part of the pipe, and then just twist and rotate backwards, and just don't bend this while you're pulling on it. Don't be really, really aggressive on it. If you have to, and you know you're going to replace in this, you could just take a razor blade and cut from here to here, and you'll be able to twist it off real easy. I do that all the time. So what always works best when you're tightening up these flared fittings is that when you push the center of the tube in all the way till it stops, then make sure that it's centered in the female threads that you're going into with the nut. And then you can always get these in finger tight. And if you're slipping off of the hex, just put a rag around it, and that'll help you, or spray some brake parts cleaner around it, and then it will be easier to turn. And you'll know that you got it right because I've included a picture with my inspection mirror that shows that the threads are straight up and down, and the nut is straight up and down, and you can see how it looks like a perfect T, which means that the threads are not to the left or to the right, so you don't have it cross-threaded. And then another telltale sign that you've gotten it right is that when you of course, when you try to tighten it by hand, you're going to know the threads are going in real easy and they're not stopping right away, is that when you put a small stubby open end wrench on it, and this works for everything that has this type of fitting, then you just turn it, and it shouldn't be very hard to turn, and then you just go a little bit at a time. If it stops and gets really hard right away, then you know that you've got an issue, and then that's the time that you know that you need to stop and you need to back it out, because you haven't destroyed the threads yet. But if it gets tight right away at the very beginning of you starting the threads in the female hole, and it gets super tight, and you continue to force it in, you're going to just break those threads right away. So that's why you do everything by hand. If you feel like it won't go in, then put a little bit of WD-40 or PB Blaster around the threads, or a little bit of automatic transmission fluid, and that'll really help a lot keep everything smooth and lubricated and going in real easy. So that's just one of my professional tips, and it works for everything that's a fuel line, brake line, anything, power steering and transmission, anything that has a flared fitting, pressure fitting like this, that's got the center pipe in the middle, and then it's got the nut, and then whatever kind of a seal it has around the whatever washer O-ring that it has. These all work the same way. Now the torque specifications are not the same, but in this case, all of these are going to be going, the 18 and the 16 millimeter are going to be going to 20 foot-pounds. Okay, so this high pressure line 18 millimeter flared fitting nut is torqued to 20 foot-pounds, as you can see here. Okay, and another thing I wanted to mention too is that I was thinking of while I was off camera is that you can just use a regular wrench, an 18 millimeter open end wrench or a line wrench that's boxed around, that has a cutout for the center part of the hose, the brake line. Excuse me. I can't think of the right thing to say, but the brake hose that for the power steering that goes in the center of the nut, and they're all going to come that way. But anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is that you'll know that you got it in tight, and you'll know that you got it in right, because not only are the threads going to be straight, and there's going to be even amount of spacing on the left and the right side, and you could even count the threads to see if you're straight. And if you look at it, looking at with both eyes open, you'll know that it's straight. Okay, so then another thing you'll do too is you can wiggle this hose here, and as you can see here, it's flexing a little bit, but it's not sliding. So if you look in the center there, you'll know that you got your nut tight when you push on the metal line, and it doesn't rotate in the center right where the nut is. And then you could also rotate it, or pull it up and push it down and rock it back and forth and see if it's moving, and just look at the center of the pipe that goes into the nut, and you'll know it's tight then, and you'll know that it's not cross-threaded, and you'll know it's pushed down all the way as far as it can go. And what that tells you is that you're not cross-threaded. It means that you're tight to where you need to be, and that you're not going to leak. Now back to what I was saying about the wrench. If you don't have a torque wrench, you could just use a regular open-ended wrench, and you just tighten it down until it feels like it's tight, but not really tight, because you can always tighten it a little tiny bit more if you see that it leaks once you get it all back together and get it running again. But once you over tighten it and you just damage the rubber O-ring and you damage the threads, you can fix it, but you're really just going to be screwed, and it's just going to make the job a whole lot worse, and it's going to make it difficult for you to continue, and you might if you're DIY, you might not be able to fix it yourself. So be careful, go slow, do things right, and use a torque wrench. And don't over tighten. You can always tighten a little bit more, but once you're too tight and you damage something, then you're really just pretty much screwed. So just keep that in mind as you're doing this job. Don't get frustrated. Just do it. slow to go fast. You will get it done. It will go in and you will get it tight. So take your time. And one last thing too, if you have so many issues trying to get the thread started, maybe those threads are not right, so you might want to stop before you continue to do it like 150 times and getting frustrated and compare them to the old threads of the old ones that came out of there. And that might help you out a lot. That's something that I've done in the past when I get frustrated and can't seem to figure out why the threads won't ever get started no matter what I do. The threads are wrong. So just make sure that you check those things out as well, and that'll really help you, make this job a real big success for you. Something I wanted to show specifically for this repair, replacing these power steering lines, is that I found it very easy when I was using the 16 millimeter or 5/8 open-end wrench to tighten this back line back there, right there. And what I found, because of such a cramped area back there, there's just really no room. And the way the line bends like that, it basically bends all the way coming back to you like a 180-degree bend, and making it very difficult to get in there with any other kind of setup, like a crow's foot or anything. So what I wanted to show you is, if you've ever wondered why a combination wrench has kind of an angle to it, this is the reason why. So I painted this 10 millimeter headed bolt here, and I just wanted to show you. So if I slide it in right over here, going on these same hex edges, this is where the wrench is going to be. The end of the wrench is going to be here. Okay? So in a cramped space, if you flip it over and you slide it up on the same ones, instead of being here, you're way over here. So it's offsetting it, and it's making it easier to, when you're loosening, you loosen, turn it over, loosen, turn it over, loosen, turn it over, like that. And that really makes it easy to get the nut off quickly when you don't have any other tool to do it. And it's you're in a cramped, tight space where it's just not feasible to get any other tool in there. Once this hose is all the way tight, the pressure side of the power steering system, make sure you put the line, once this nut is torqued, then you can bend this line just a little bit, and I'm talking about like millimeters, just so that there's a separation between the tip of that threaded bolt going through and then the case service cover right there on the gearbox, where it's got 4 bolts and then 1 in the center. You want it just to be centered in there, and it looks like it's not, but it is. I put a feeler gauge back behind there, the threaded stud sticking out, and so I have space. And then what you'll do is make sure that you can put like a finger of space underneath here. You see where my thumb is? Underneath the line in the power steering pump. Even if it was touching, nothing probably would ever happen, but that's how I found the old one, and it could vibrate and rub a spot into it and making a hole and creating a leak, So that's just the way my mind works, is I just don't like comebacks, so I do what I can to, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So that goes a long way, and that can be used in every aspect of auto repair. So once all that's all good, then one thing that I noticed as well is that when I originally took the line out, this little cover here on the steering column that protrudes through the firewall and goes down here to connect up to the gearbox, this little plastic cover was turned all the way over here, and I was wondering if maybe this line was taken off before, and then I realized that this is just in the way. So you can either cut it off, or you could just turn it over to the side, and then that way you can be able to get your wrench on there and tighten it up. Because once I started to put it in, and then I realized that this little plastic piece was in the way, and I couldn't get my socket or my wrench on it anymore. So it was really difficult. I was fighting it. So slide that over, and then that'll make it real easy, and then you can put your return line in. One tip that might help somebody out is as you're threading in the nut, wiggle the line a little bit, and it will kind of help those threads kind of find their way into the female threaded holes in there, and that I find helps in all situations, brake lines, transmission lines, power steering lines, all those. So it's just a little tip to help you get these threads started, and they should go pretty easy once you get the thread started properly. It should thread in pretty easy, and then you'll know that it's in because you will have gone about one full turn or a turn and a half or two full turns, and it's still going, and that means that you don't have any issues. The time you have an issue is when you feel it get tight right away, really, really quick, and then you pinch it real hard with your fingers and it doesn't move at all, and you put a towel on it or spray some brake parts cleaner and it still doesn't move, and that's how you know it's cross-threaded. So you want to back it off and make sure you recenter it and try it again. Two things I wanted to show you here. If you do auto repair for a living, or you do a lot of auto repair work, keep all the hoses, or at least a couple of different diameter size hoses. These are junk hoses from a heater core I did on a job maybe a year ago, and cut off a little piece or any time that you run into a situation where you think two hoses are going to rub against each other. And I already bent this line just a little bit, and I really didn't want to bend it anymore. So, I just didn't want to bend it to the point where it might make a leak or something, because I already moved it like 2-3 millimeters to make space for underneath the reservoir of the power steering pump. So you'll just cut a piece of hose about the length that you want to protect the actual hose itself from rubbing on something that you think it could cause a future problem, and then just put some zip ties around it. And I always do this anytime I'm worried something's rubbing, because when you use aftermarket hoses or parts, sometimes the hoses don't bend and conform to the way that they were originally out of the way and done perfectly. And so that's why I've done it here. And you could actually wrap another part around the metal crimp if you wanted to, another piece of hose, but I don't need to. This is going to be fine. I'm not going to have any issues doing it this way, and this will last a good long time. And then last step, you just want to make sure that you have some space here between this hose, and I'm going to zip tie it like this so that it doesn't ever want to rub into the belt. So that's another thing you need to be mindful of. And if you've ever been curious how tight to tighten a hose clamp on these 8mm headed hose clamps, the tightest that you can go on them with a torque wrench is about between 35 to 45 inch-pounds, which is, I think, like 2 foot-pounds, or somewhere between 2 and 3 foot-pounds. It's not very much, but anything that you're going to use, such as this TPMS torque wrench that I use, works really well for tightening up hose clamps. On the little hose clamps that are like the 7mm or the 1/4 inch, those no more than 20 inch-pounds or you'll break them. So this one here, I got it set for 45 inch-pounds. And that's all I need to do on this one. And then I'll take off my torque wrench and I'll just push on it. Make sure it's good. And just make sure if it helps, you could always mark with a chalk pen or a paint pen where the old hose came off, and then just push the new hose on until you reach that spot. I just push it on knowing that as long as I don't go past the bend, then I'm good. And then I just put the hose clamp back a couple, maybe 10 millimeters back, so it's not actually on the bend, if there is a bend in a pipe or a nipple or something that you're putting a hose clamp on. But basically you want to push it on about 1 inch to maybe 1.5 inches. And then you can also push with your finger until you feel the tip of the pipe. And then once you feel that, you go back maybe 10, 12, 13 millimeters, and then that's where you put the hose clamp. That's what always works for me. And I never have any leaks, or I never have any comebacks. Hey viewers, thank you for watching my channel. I just wanted to say, if you guys are learning from my videos and you want to see more, consider subscribing. Thank you.